Yeah, verse 1, he says it. That's what he is asking God, why is this happening to me? Um, so if we look at Psalms 38, the first verse of Psalm 38 actually begins the exact same way as Psalm 6. In Psalms 38, David confesses that he is guilty in verse 4 and admits that he is troubled by his iniquities and sin in verse 18. In neither psalm, however, we are told the specific nature of David's sin, nor are we told of the occasion. So, should we normally assume that our suffering is due to God's anger? Okay, not necessarily. Okay.
Hebrews 12 says, though, if you're having hardship, you should consider it as discipline from the Lord. And, because the Lord is rebuking you. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, you look for a lesson in what you're going through. And if anything else, it's a chance to rely on God even more and to seek the right path of holiness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yep. Awesome. So what specific requests does David make to the Lord in verses 1 through 4? So he says, "Do not rebuke me or discipline me. Be merciful, heal me, turn and deliver me, and save me." So what do David's requests reveal about God's character? So with those four verses that we just show the request of, how does that show God's character? It's a healer, yeah.
All right, so it reminds me of the story in the Old Testament when David had Joab, I think it was, have to do a census. Remember, and the Lord was angry. And then there were 3 choices that were given to them about the punishment that they were going to have. It was 3 days of being totally beaten by the enemies, and then there was something else, but then one was 3 days of plague. And the reason why David chose that was exactly for this, because David knew God was merciful. And he said, because perhaps the Lord will have mercy on us and relent. And so that's the nature of God. God is merciful even when we don't deserve the mercy that he gives. So,
good. Thank you. All right, so although David believes that his suffering is due to God's anger and wrath, he maintains his high viewpoint of God's character. David realizes that God is merciful, which Scott was just alluding to in verse 2, a healing physician also in verse 2, a savior, and a God of infinite and unfailing love. So what aspects of God's character do you cling to in times of anguish? So in times of anguish, what do we cling to? Sure.
I think God's just always keeping his promises. And, God's given us a lot of anguish promises, eternity, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And just the fact that God has always told the truth.
Yeah, in our earlier lessons, he's done it in the past, so he's going to do it in the future. It's perfect. So when suffering and anguish invades our lives, many people begin to doubt God's love, mercy, and care. Some, and we talked about this with Job, they concluded that God could not be loving and allow them to experience such pain. So the Greek and Western philosophers brought that up when we talked about Job. But like David, we need to cling to our faith in God's character during the bad times as well as the good times. When we fail to do so, we fulfill Satan's accusation against Job as we serve God only because he rewards us, as long as he keeps us and our lives tranquil and free from pain. So how does the mood of the Psalms suddenly shift in verse 8 through 10? So if we go look at 8 through 10, it states, "Depart from me, all the workers of evil, for the Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my plea. The Lord has accepted my prayer. All the enemies shall be ashamed and greatly troubled. They shall turn back and put to shame in a moment." So how does it shift? Perfect. Yep. So he has faith that God will provide because he's done it in the past. Because David is so confident in God's mercy and unfailing love, he can also be confident that the Lord has heard and will answer his prayers. If our prayer lack confidence, we may have too low a view of God. David's confidence is also based on God's promise of Israel, Deuteronomy 7:9, as well as to David and his dynasty. In order to have the degree of confidence David exhibits, we must base our request on what God has promised. If you are suffering right now, make David's prayer your own in Psalm 6. Pray the words of the psalm because of God's unfailing love. Trust that he has heard your prayers and will answer it because he's done it in the past. So the next one we're going to look at is going to be in Psalms 27. So it's a couple chapters later. So if you want to flip there, again, we'll read it in a moment. One of Samuel Beckett's most famous plays is titled Waiting on Goddard. Throughout the play, the characters wait for Goddard to appear, but he never does. The play is Beckett's way of saying that hope is futile, especially hope in God. For those who do not trust God, waiting can be a desperate state. For those who do trust in God, waiting can be incredibly difficult as well, but we can wait with hope. In contrast to Beckett's despair, the Bible offers hope to the suffering. When we see no possibility of relief, David assures us, "I am still confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." So Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Who I shall fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat my flesh and my adversaries and foes, it is they who will stumble and fall. Though an army encamps against me, my heart shall not fear. The war arise against me, yet I will be confident. One thing have I asked the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melodies to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, I will cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. You have said, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. Hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger. Or, O you who have been my help. Cast me off, forsake me not, O God of my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Give me not to the will of my adversaries, for false witness have risen against me, and they breathe out violence. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. All right, so David's confidence in his prayer is based on God's promises to him in 2 Samuel. So what items in the psalm are related to God's promise? So we're going to flip to 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 5 through 16. So 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 5 through 16. And I'll be reading out the ESV. That's what we've been reading up there. So 5 through 16. Go and tell my servant David, thus say the Lord, would you build me a house to dwell in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. In all places where I have moved, well, all the people of Israel, did I speak a word with any of the judges of Israel, whom I command to shepherd my people, Israel, saying, why have you not built my house of cedar? Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus say the Lord of the host, I take you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all of your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly, for the time that I appointed judges over my people of Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house when your days are fulfilled, and lie down with your fathers. I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits inquiry, I will discipline him with a rod of men, and with the stripes of the Son of Men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. So David's assurance that he has nothing to fear from his enemies in verse 1 through 3 is based on God's promise in 2 Samuel. So if you look at verses 1 through 3 that we just read in Psalms 27, it's coming from his promise, what God has done in the past. His confidence that he will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, verse 13 in Psalms 27, is based on the promises in 2 Samuel 7, 9 through 16. God has promised that David's name would be great. Israel would be established in the land, and David would rest from his enemies. He would have an offspring, and his kingdom who would be established forever. These promises give David great confidence in time of stress and affliction. Our faith, too, must be grounded in God's promise. Sometimes we are told that in our faith, if our faith is strong enough, or if we name it or claim it, God will definitely answer your prayer. Yet, such assumptions can be naive at times. John tells us this is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us whenever we ask, we know that we have what we ask of him in 1 John 5:14 through 15. Only those prayers that are according to God's will are answered. And the best way to know God's will is to look at what he has commanded and promised. So what images of safety does David apply to the Lord in verses 1 through 2 and 5 through 6?
Well, we all like the light. The light makes us feel like we have even if we can't, we can at least see what's out there in front of us. I mean, I don't mind as much driving in terrible weather if I can see what the terrible weather is.
Yep.
But if it's dark and I don't know what the terrible weather is, then that's a little bit of a problem. And then being called the stronghold of my life is really kind of a great admission of saying, this is where I'm going to put my strength or my faith in all situations. So David, in this, to me, he is bought in. You know, he says, no matter what happens to me, this is where I'm going, and this is what I'm expecting from my relationship with God.
Awesome, thank you. Exactly. So the word light in verse 1 often symbolizes well-being in life and safety for a lot of us. A stronghold was a fortress that protected people from their enemies. So David knows, therefore, that the God is the source of his life and well-being, so his savior from all potential harm and his protector from all his enemies. David also refers to the Lord as one who keeps him safe and who hides and shelters him and who will exalt him, 5 through 6. So David seeks not only the Lord's protection, but also the Lord himself. How is David's intense desire of God revealed in this psalm? So in verse 4, one thing have I asked the Lord that I will seek after, that I may dwell in his house, the Lord, all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple.
I like the crying, like literally crying for God.
Okay.
Showing that desire.
Yeah. Showing desire, crying out to the Lord. Perfect. So David's primary prayer in this psalm is not for protection, but rather the privilege of dwelling in the house of the Lord all of his days of his life, which we just read in verse 4. He desires nothing more than to seek the Lord, verse 4 and verse 8, and to gaze upon his beauty. David also wants to learn from the Lord and be guided by him so he can walk in a straight path, verse 11. These are the requests of a man who is passionately devoted to God. So David's confident statement about the Lord in verses 1 through 6 leads up to his prayer in verse 7 through 12. So what is the substance of the prayer? So, there it is. Hopefully I said the same question. So the hear my voice, be merciful to me, in verse 7. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger, in verse 9. Do not reject me or forsake me, in verse 9. Also in verse 9. Do not turn me over to the desires of my foe. These are the prayers of a man of a man who seeks the deliverance for real and present danger. And what are those dangers? So the Psalm mentioned enemies in verse 2 and 6. And if we go back to Psalm 6, he talked about his enemies as well. So in this time, there were wars mentioned in verse 3. Foes and false witnesses are also described in verse 12. So why must your hope not only be confident, but also patient? so confidence is one thing, but why do we have to have patience with hope?
Kind of gives the control to God.
Okay.
Versus you trying to control it and so that
Okay, gives the control to God, and it's not just I prayed for this, I need it now kind of thing. Putting God on a timetable is never a good idea, because he'll definitely make you wait for it if that's his plan. So in Hebrews 11 verse 1 tells us that faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. By faith, David was confident that his prayer would be answered, but he also knew that he needed to wait patiently for those answers. Genuine faith does not expect or demand instant results. So I'll leave you with this. So a quote from C.S. Lewis: Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. This quote by him has, I guess people have took it many ways. How I took it is in Revelation chapter 3, verse 15 and 16. And this is the Lord talking to the church in Laodicea. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you would rather be cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. So being lukewarm in any situation is never good. Be confident in the Lord and he will provide. Next week, Brian will be doing the power of weakness, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 1 through 10. Thank you.